The maps no longer carried its name. Pilots had another word for it, the graveyard. A canyon that swallowed aircraft whole, where turbulence killed as surely as bullets, and every ridge carried fire. Drones never returned, helicopters never cleared the cliffs, and the last A-10 that went in had crawled back smoking, its pilot grounded and forgotten. So when a SEAL team's last radio burst broke through the static, command turned to the general. He studied the map, shook his head once, and gave the sentence every man feared. That canyon is a graveyard. No one flies it again. Silence followed, because if the general said it, it was law. But on the edge of a forgotten airfield, a woman heard those words and pulled her gloves tighter. She wasn't supposed to fly. She wasn't cleared, but she had flown that canyon once before, and she knew something the general didn't. Graveyards don't bury everyone. You're watching The Storyscape, where hidden legends come alive. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? Because what you're about to hear isn't just about a canyon, or a command, or an order no one dared to question. It's about the moment one woman strapped into her A-10, ignored every warning, and carved her way straight through what others had already named the graveyard. The canyon had a name once. Maps labeled it neatly, soldiers wrote it in reports, and pilots logged it in their flight records. But no one used that name anymore. To the men who had flown near it, to the ones who had lost friends inside it, the place had earned a darker title, the graveyard. It was easy to see why. The slot of rock ran jagged through the mountains, narrow enough to scrape a wingtip, deep enough to block satellite locks, and twisted enough to throw every instrument into chaos. The wind there was alive, shifting in sharp gusts that knocked helicopters off balance and made drones spin uselessly into stone. And worse than the wind were the eyes. Enemy teams dug in on ridges, RPGs nested in caves, heavy weapons hidden behind stone blinds. Anything that flew in became a target, and nothing had ever flown in twice. Now, at the floor of that canyon, a SEAL team was pinned. The ambush was fast, precise. Gunfire erupted from two ridges at once, cutting the team in half before they could take cover. Two men went down instantly, one with a leg torn open, the other bleeding from his shoulder. Another SEAL tried to drag them behind shattered masonry that had once been part of a livestock pen. But even that cover was thin. Dust sprayed into their faces with every impact. Their radio man twisted knobs on the handset until his fingers cramped, fighting to push a signal through the canyon's interference. The call came out broken, pieces of words drowned in static. Contact north and east, 2 men down, requesting, then nothing. 80 kilometers away, the forward command tent buzzed with that static before it died altogether. The room was hot with sweat and tension, its air filled with equipment that couldn't help. Screens blinked maps with half-loaded grids. Drones had already been lost. A recon helo had come back shredded by ground fire. The canyon was blind, deaf, and merciless. Their last ping was Sector 7, the SEAL liaison said, leaning over the map table. His face was pale, but his voice tried to stay steady. They're boxed in. They won't last. A young officer asked the question no one wanted to say aloud. Can we get them air? The silence was instant, thick, suffocating. Everyone in the tent knew the math. Aircraft did not survive the graveyard. The last A-10 that had gone in barely crawled out again, its pilot grounded for reckless maneuvering. A drone feed had vanished without explanation. Helicopters refused to attempt insertion. Air cover had become a death sentence. And so all eyes turned to the one man who had the authority to end the discussion, the general. He had flown combat missions before, long ago. He knew what it meant to risk lives and what it meant to waste them. His finger traced the jagged canyon line on the map. He saw the choke points where wind shear flipped aircraft. He saw the narrow slots where no countermeasure could save a bird from a heat seeker. He saw the clusters of red where intelligence marked enemy fighters. His jaw set like stone. When he finally spoke, the words were simple and sharp. No aircraft goes back in. That canyon is a graveyard. The sentence hit like a hammer. The tent fell silent. Some nodded, grim and resigned. Others looked away, unable to meet the map that condemned the SEALs. One captain started to protest, but the weight of the general's tone crushed the words in his throat. Abort. It wasn't said aloud, but everyone heard it. The mission was already written off. In the canyon, the SEAL team felt that silence too. They didn't know exactly what command had decided, but they could read it in the lack of response. No extraction, no air cover. They were alone. One of them pressed the tourniquet tighter on his teammate's leg. Another set his last magazine into his rifle with shaking hands. They all knew what it meant to be written off. But far from the command tent, on the cracked concrete of a forgotten airfield, someone else was listening.
She sat on the wing of an A-10 that hadn't flown in weeks. Fury 3. The aircraft bore scars from battles long past, panels unpainted, shark teeth stenciled under its nose, maintenance tags fluttering like scars across its fuselage. Its last flight had been into that canyon, where she had dragged it back against all odds, wings shredded and systems failing. Command had grounded her afterward. Too risky, too reckless. Her access codes revoked, her flight hours stripped. She hadn't protested, she hadn't argued. She waited, silent, knowing the day would come when silence would kill someone else. Now it had. Through the crackling maintenance radio in the hangar, she heard the general's words hiss out like poison. That canyon is a graveyard. Her jaw clenched. For command, that word was final. For her, it was the beginning. She slid off the wing, boots crunching against the dust. She ran her glove across the fuselage, feeling the old machine's warmth in the midday sun. It wasn't cleared, it wasn't ready, but neither were the men bleeding in that canyon. Her hand lingered on the nose art, Fury 3, her jet, her partner. They had survived the graveyard once before. "Looks like we're going back," she whispered. She didn't need permission. She didn't need clearance. She only needed ignition. And when she walked toward the cockpit ladder, the decision was already made. The general had called it a graveyard. She was about to prove him wrong. The Warthog was never meant to fly again. At least, that's what the maintenance log said, taped to its side with blue tape and signed by 3 different mechanics. Hydraulics unstable, avionics inspection overdue, flares depleted. Status, grounded. But to her, Fury 3 wasn't grounded. It was waiting. She climbed the ladder 2 steps at a time and dropped into the seat like she was coming home. The cockpit smelled of old oil and scorched wiring. Her hands moved with a rhythm that no checklist could capture. Battery on. APU engaged. Fuel pumps primed. The panel flickered reluctantly to life. Screens blinking yellow warnings she muted instantly. "Systems online enough," she muttered. Outside, a crew chief sprinted toward the aircraft, shouting through cupped hands, "Major! You can't take that jet! She's not cleared!" The woman glanced down through the canopy, eyes sharp. "Clear the ladder." He froze. Something in her tone carried more weight than any paperwork. With a sharp exhale, he yanked the chocks free, slapped the fuselage twice, a signal every pilot understood, and stepped back. The engines coughed, then roared. Twin turbines shrieked as the Warthog shook itself awake, dust spiraling from beneath the wings. Across the airfield, tower officers scrambled to windows, headsets pressed to their ears. "Fury 3, this is Control. You are not cleared for taxi. Identify." Her voice came calm and cold. This is Fury 3, emergency launch, Sector 7. The tower erupted. Negative! That airframe is grounded. Repeat, grounded. Abort engine start.
She ignored them. The throttle slid forward under her hand, and the Warthog rolled. Every vibration of the cracked runway rattled her teeth, but she kept pushing. The nose lifted, the concrete blurred, and then the ground fell away. Fury 3 was airborne. At forward command, the operations tent erupted. Screens that had been blank for hours now lit up with a blip racing low and fast toward the canyon. "Who authorized this?" an officer shouted. "No one," the comms tech answered, pale. "She just took off." The general's jaw flexed. He stared at the blip in silence, then slammed his fist against the table. "God damn it! I said no one flies that canyon." Arguments broke out instantly. "She'll get herself killed. If she goes down, we'll have to mount a recovery. She's the only one who's flown it before, if anyone can get through." The SEAL liaison cut in, his voice hard. "If you want those men alive, you let her try." The tent split down the middle, half screaming about insubordination, half clinging to the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, she could do what no one else would. The general stood silent, watching the blip drop below radar coverage as she dove lower. He could no longer track her. She had vanished into the graveyard. In the canyon, the SEAL team had gone quiet. Ammunition was almost gone, and the wounded were slipping in and out of consciousness. The only sound was the enemy shifting above them, preparing for the final push. One SEAL muttered, almost to himself, "This is it." Then he froze. A sound crawled into the canyon, faint at first, then growing, a low metallic growl that shook the dust from the stones. The ground vibrated beneath them. The wounded opened their eyes. The team leader raised his head, hardly daring to believe it. "Do you hear that?" one whispered. The sound rose, bouncing between cliffs, louder, heavier, not thunder, not wind, the unmistakable roar of twin General Electric TF-34 engines screaming against stone. A voice cracked through the static of their failing radio, faint but undeniable. "Echo Team, this is Fury 3. I have you. Hold on." For the first time all day, the men smiled. The general had called the canyon a graveyard, but now, buried under the roar of an A-10 diving into the impossible, the SEALs knew not everyone was ready to be buried. The canyon closed around her like a vice the moment Fury 3 dropped below the ridgeline. Sunlight vanished. The world narrowed to walls of stone, jagged and unforgiving, twisting in ways that made maps worthless. This was the graveyard the general had warned about, and she was flying straight into its throat.
Her HUD lit up instantly. Heat blooms scattered along both ridges. Too many. Some small, scattered. Rifles. Spotters. Others larger, hotter, sitting still in places where no man should linger unless guarding something heavy. She ignored the warnings flashing red across her panel. Fuel low, hydraulics unstable, stabilizer fault. Those didn't matter. The only numbers that mattered were the ones climbing on her HUD, the enemies waiting for the SEALs below. "Echo Team, mark if you can," she called, voice steady. Static clawed back at her. Then a burst came through, fractured but clear enough. "Green smoke, east wall." She didn't hesitate. Nose down, throttle forward. The canyon rushed up to meet her as the GAU-8 Avenger spun up, its metallic roar vibrating through her bones. She squeezed the trigger. The cannon thundered, sending 30mm shells ripping through stone. The ridge bloomed dust and fire. 3 signatures scattered. One winked out completely. She pulled through the pass, engines groaning, and the canyon answered back. Tracers tore past the canopy, sparking off stone. Then came the plume. Bright, fast, undeniable. A missile launch. No flares, no countermeasures. Instinct was all she had. She yanked the Warthog into a hard left,
dropping altitude so low her wingtips sliced dust from the cliff face. The missile chased her, hungry for her heat. She cut throttle, let it close, then at the last instant pulled vertical, rolling the jet knife edge. The seeker snapped, lost sight, and slammed into the wall. The blast lit the canyon orange, the shockwave battering her fuselage. Panels rattled, warning lights screamed, but the Warthog didn't quit. "Still here," she muttered, forcing the stick back level. At forward command, silence crushed the tent. The explosion carried over comms. One officer whispered, "Impact." Another started, "She's gone," before her voice cut through the static again. Fury 3, continuing run. The SEAL liaison slammed his palm on the table. "She made it!" The general didn't move. His jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed locked on the map. "Transmit recall." The comms officer obeyed, voice tight. "Fury 3, return to base immediately. That is a direct order." Her reply came cold, final. "Negative. I'm already in the fight. Review me later." On the canyon floor, the SEALs clutched rifles with hands that shook from blood loss more than fear. Ammunition was almost gone. One man pressed a tourniquet so tight his fingertips went white. Another whispered, "We're not getting out." Then the engines roared overhead. The metallic growl filled the canyon, bouncing off stone walls like thunder. Dust shook loose from the cliffs. Every man's head turned skyward. "She's here," the team leader said, voice breaking. They dragged their wounded to their feet and started moving. Above, Fury 3 lined up again. The west ridge flashed with new movement. 7 fighters, one dragging a launcher. She fired before they could raise it. The cannon ripped the ridge apart, scattering men like leaves in a storm.
Her cockpit screamed fresh alarms. Hydraulics in the red, fuel bleeding, stabilizer light flickering dark, but she didn't ease up. "Echo Team, 2 clicks from Echo Point. Stay low, hug the east wall," she ordered. They obeyed, not because they knew her, but because her voice left no space for doubt. Another plume flared from the south spur. Faster, smarter. This wasn't random fire. It was a trained team. The missile locked immediately. She banked hard, forcing geometry, rolled into its path, then under it, dragging it lower. The seeker pitched down to chase, but the canyon curve broke its brain. It slammed into the wall, detonating in a ball of fire. Fury 3 shuddered, controls heavy, but stayed airborne. "Hold together, old girl," she whispered. Back at command, the SEAL liaison pointed at the comms feed. She found a jammer. "Comms are clear." For the first time, the SEAL team's voices carried steady across the net. "Fury 3, we're pushing. Wounded secure. 90 seconds to Echo Point." "Copy. Keep your heads down. I'll keep theirs lower." She dove again, cannon spitting fury, tearing new scars into the ridges. Each pass bought her 50 more meters. Each pass cost her another piece of the jet. The graveyard was eating Fury 3 alive, but not before she dragged her men through it. Echo Point was less a landing zone than a dare. From a distance, it looked like salvation, a patch of flat ground carved into the stone floor of the canyon. Up close, it was a bullseye. No cover, no walls, no shade. A flat scar where helicopters had to hover like targets painted against the sky. Every soldier in the valley knew it, and every fighter on the ridges had been waiting for it. The SEAL team staggered toward it anyway. They didn't have another choice. Boots pounded against dust, rifles clutched in trembling hands, the wounded hauled over shoulders. 2 men bled through their bandages but refused to be left behind. The team leader's voice rasped through the net, raw and stripped bare. "Echo Point in sight, 90 seconds out. We'll make it or we won't." Above them, Fury 3 circled. The pilot's hands were numb inside her gloves, her body locked into the rhythm of survival. She'd stopped counting how many passes she'd made. The jet fell heavier, slower, every vibration threatening to snap something loose. But her eyes were on the HUD, and what she saw made her gut clench. The southern ridge was alive. Not with scattered fighters firing wild, but with organization. Heat blooms grouped together, steady, dragging crates, positioning tubes. She recognized the signatures instantly. Not rifles, not RPGs. These were launchers, anti-air. The enemy hadn't just been trying to bleed the SEALs dry. They had been waiting for the helicopters. She keyed her mic. Forward command, Fury 3, Southern Ridge is hot. Heavy signatures. If the extraction comes in blind, it won't leave. The reply came clipped, cold, bureaucratic. Fury 3, maintain observation only. Extraction plan is locked. Do not engage. Her jaw tightened. Observation didn't stop missiles. She muted the channel. The Warthog rolled, nose down, wings shaking as she forced the dive. The GAU-8 Avenger spun up, growling like something alive. She pressed the trigger. The cannon tore through the ridge, rock bursting into clouds, figures scattering in panic. A launcher toppled, tumbling useless down the slope. One heat bloom flared, then blinked out. She pulled up hard, chest slamming against the harness. The cockpit rattled. Alarm screamed. Hydraulics dipped into red. The stick fought her hand. She forced it steady. For a moment, the ridge was quiet. Then came another plume of smoke, streaking high across the canyon. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the first Chinook. Her blood went cold. The bird was still 30 seconds out, its twin rotors thundering toward Echo Point. Too heavy to dodge, too slow to outrun. If that missile hit, everyone inside was gone. She didn't think, she acted. Throttle forward, nose down. Fury 3 screamed across the canyon, cutting directly into the missile's path. The seeker snapped, abandoning the helicopter for her heat signature. The trail bent sharply, locking onto her engines. "She pulled it off!" a SEAL shouted from below, watching the smoke hook after her. Now it was hers to deal with. The missile closed fast. The warning tone shrieked solid in her ears. She had no flares, no countermeasures, just instinct and stone. She dropped low, hugging the canyon wall so tight her wing nearly scraped it. In the last instant, she pulled vertical, forcing the missile to follow her up. It couldn't. The seeker clipped the ridge and detonated, the blast shaking the entire canyon. Her cockpit slammed sideways. Lights went red across the board. The stabilizer indicator blinked, then died. Hydraulics bled pressure. But when she yanked the stick, the Warthog still moved. "Still here," she hissed. On the ground, the SEAL leader screamed into his mic. "Stormcaller, you just saved the birds!" No time to answer. She was already lining up again. The first Chinook roared into Echo Point, blades chopping dust into a storm. Door gunners leaned out, rifles spitting tracers across the ridges. The SEALs broke cover, hauling their wounded through open ground. Bullets sparked off stone around them, but they kept moving. From the west slope, another launcher flashed. She dove. The GAU-8 barked, thunder rolling through the canyon. The launcher team vanished in fire and stone. Fighters tumbled down the slope. She pulled up again, alarm screaming, her jet groaning like an old warhorse. The first Chinook lifted, straining into the air, its hold packed with bleeding men. Dust whipped around its blades. It climbed slow, heavy, but climbing. The second bird swung in, its rotors howling. The remaining SEALs sprinted across the open, weapons nearly empty. The door gunner waved them forward, covering with bursts of fire. They stumbled up the ramp, dragging the last wounded aboard. Enemy rifles cracked. One SEAL staggered, but was dragged inside by his teammates. The helicopter shuddered under the impact of rounds sparking off its hull. Above, Fury 3 tore past again, cannon blazing. The ridges collapsed under her fire, fighters scattering into smoke. She rolled, nose up, scanning for any last plume, any last flash that meant another missile. The second Chinook rose, its engine screaming with strain. Dust boiled, the flat ground vanishing under rotor wash. The SEAL leader's voice came over comms, ragged but fierce. "Stormcaller, both birds are airborne. We're clear." Her console was lit in red. Fuel under 28%. Hydraulics bleeding. Stabilizer dead. The Warthog flew like a crippled beast, but she circled above Echo Point anyway, guns armed, eyes hunting for threats. "You're not clear until I say you are," she muttered. For another minute she circled, daring the ridges to fire again. None did. The canyon had spent everything it had. She exhaled once, steady, and called it in. Fury 3, Echo Point secure, extraction outbound. From the ramp of the helicopter, one SEAL looked back through the storm of dust. He watched the battered A-10 circle above, wings scarred, smoke trailing faint from its fuselage, and he whispered words the mic didn't catch. She didn't just hold the sky, she owned it. The first Chinook lifted in a storm of dust, blades thrashing the canyon air like a hurricane bottled between cliffs. Inside, half the SEALs were already piled in, dragging their wounded across the vibrating deck, door gunners leaning out to spick tracers back into the ridges. The bird climbed slowly, heavy with men and ammo, but it was climbing. The second Chinook was still on the ground. Dust wrapped it in a choking veil, the engine screaming as it fought to hover low while the last of the team sprinted through the open kill zone. Every second it lingered on the canyon floor was a dare to the fighters waiting in the rocks. And the enemy answered. On the southern ridge, her HUD lit with new signatures, not just rifles, not just RPGs, larger, hotter. Something dragged into position while she had been holding off the rest. She recognized the pattern instantly. Dedicated launchers, anti-air assets. They hadn't just been trying to crush the SEALs, they had been setting a trap for the extraction. She keyed her mic. "Command, this is Fury 3. Southern Ridge has heavy weapon signatures. Extraction will not make it out." The reply came immediate, sharp, bureaucratic. "Fury 3, maintain observation only. The extraction flight is locked. Do not engage." Her teeth clenched. Observation didn't stop missiles. She thumbed the channel mute.
The A-10 rolled, nose down, and dove. The Avenger spun up, and its brutal growl shook the entire valley. She lined the ridge in her sights and cut loose. The bursts shredded the slope, rock blooming into clouds of dust. Fighters scattered in panic. The largest signature flickered bright, then dark. She had hit it. But as she pulled up, alarm screamed. The cockpit rattled. Hydraulic pressure dipped red. The stick fought her grip, heavy and sluggish. She forced it level with a grunt. Fury 3 was still flying, but it was groaning like an old war horse asked to charge one battle too many. "Stormcaller," the SEAL leader's voice cracked through the net, barely audible over rotor thunder. "Last man loading, 30 seconds." "Copy," she said, forcing calm into her voice. Then she saw it, a streak of smoke, rising fast from the western spur, a missile, not aimed at her, aimed at the Chinook still on the ground. Her chest went cold. The helicopter couldn't dodge, not with men climbing its ramp, not with its weight balanced on the knife's edge of lift. If it took the hit, the canyon would become a funeral pyre. She shoved the throttle forward, cutting across the missile's line. The seeker snapped to her heat. The plume bent, chasing her engines instead of the helicopter. "She pulled it off!" one of the SEALs screamed from the ramp of the bird, watching the missile hook after her. Now it was her problem. The missile closed fast, the warning tone rising into a solid scream. She had no flares, no countermeasures, just instinct and the canyon's teeth. "Come on," she whispered. At the last instant, she dropped the jet low, dragging the missile into the wall's curve. The seeker overcorrected, snapped into stone, and detonated. The blast hammered her fuselage, slammed her head into the harness. Lights went red across her console. Hydraulics failed entirely on the left channel. One stabilizer light went dark, not fixed, just dead. Her ears rang. Smoke leaked from the panel, but the stick still moved, barely. "Still here," she hissed through gritted teeth. The second Chinook rose in a storm of dust, rotors clawing skyward. Door gunners lit the ridges covering the seals piled inside. The team leader's voice broke across the comms, raw with disbelief. "Stormcaller, both birds are airborne. We're out." She allowed herself 1 second of relief. Then reality slammed back. The enemy wasn't finished. Her scope flickered again. Smaller launches, fighters taking desperate shots at the retreating helicopters. She couldn't let a single one connect. "Not while I'm still breathing." She pitched Fury 3 into another dive, cannon roaring. The Avengers burst, chewed the ridges, cutting the fighters down before they could even shoulder their tubes. She carved a wall of fire between the helicopters and the threat, her engines howling like something alive and furious.
The Chinooks climbed, wobbling higher and higher, pulling free from the kill box. Their silhouettes shrank, black against the pale sky. For a long moment she circled, daring the enemy to fire again. None did. The ridges were broken, scattered, and silent. "Echo Team, confirm status," she called. The reply came steady, a voice that sounded almost like disbelief. "Stormcaller, all accounted for. Wounded stable. We're outbound. You gave us the sky." She closed her eyes for a beat. The mission was real now. They were alive. Her gaze dropped to the console. Fuel under 20%, hydraulics gone red, stabilizer indicator blank. Every vibration in the jet said she had no business still being airborne. But she was. She keyed her mic to forward command. "Fury 3, Echo Team clear, extraction complete. I'm RTB." The tent back at base erupted with noise, officers talking over each other, disbelief, arguments, relief. But she didn't hear it. Her focus was on the wounded beast she flew. Fury 3 groaned under her hands, every movement heavier than the last. She had dragged the Warthog through hell one more time. But hell had left its mark. As she banked north toward friendly skies, the canyon fell silent beneath her. Not the silence of ambush, not the silence of waiting, but the silence that comes when a battlefield realizes it's been beaten. The graveyard hadn't claimed her. Not today. The helicopters were gone, black silhouettes shrinking against the horizon. Echo Team was alive. That fact alone was a miracle. But Fury 3 was dying. Her cockpit was a swarm of alarms, fuel in the red, hydraulics bleeding out, stabilizer dark. The stick felt like it was fighting her, every correction a negotiation with a machine that should have fallen apart miles ago. Smoke curled from the panel. Her body ached from every impact, every violent maneuver. Still, she kept the nose pointed home. "Fury 3, this is forward command," she said. Her voice was calm, flat. "Echo Team secure. Extraction complete. Returning to base." In the command tent, silence fell. They had written those men off, even said the canyon was a graveyard. Now her voice shattered their certainty. Some officers whispered disbelief, others muttered about court-martial, but all of them turned to the general. He didn't speak. He just stared at the map, jaw clenched.
and finally said, "Bring her home." The return flight stretched every second into eternity. Gusts slammed the fuselage, each one threatening to rip the Warthog apart. The fuel needles sank lower with every kilometer. Warning tones screamed until she shut them off, preferring silence. She didn't need to be told she was flying on borrowed time. At last, the runway appeared through the haze. "Fury 3, tower. Your jet is not flight-worthy. Abort landing. Divert." "Negative," she cut in, voice firm. "She's coming home."
She lined up the approach. The front strut collapsed on impact, the nose slamming hard into the tarmac. Sparks lit across the concrete. The Warthog skidded, bounced, nearly rolled. She fought the stick, boots crushing the pedals, forcing the aircraft straight, until, with one final groan, Fury 3 screeched to a halt at the far edge of the field. The canopy hissed open. She climbed out, her flight suit streaked with oil, her gloves torn, her face smeared with sweat and dust. Ground crews rushed toward her, but froze halfway. No one spoke. They had heard her voice holding the canyon, seen her keep the sky alive. Now they just stared. 2 black SUVs rolled up. Men in plain uniforms stepped out. No names, no insignia. The kind of men who didn't need introductions. "Major, you'll come with us." She didn't flinch. "Am I under arrest?" "No, ma'am." Debrief. They drove her past the hangars, past the briefing rooms, into a low, windowless building. Inside, a single table, a single chair, and a folder waiting. The man already inside didn't rise. Older, steady, eyes unreadable. He gestured for her to sit. "You disobeyed a direct order, entered a restricted zone, engaged without clearance, flew a grounded jet into enemy fire." She said nothing. He flipped the folder. "And you saved 6 men, neutralized enemy assets, prevented the loss of 2 aircraft, alone." He closed it. "Why don't you look concerned?" She leaned back, meeting his eyes. "Because I've already had worse days. This wasn't one." A faint smile touched his lips. He slid a patch across the table. Black fabric, no unit, no crest, just a single word stitched in silver. Stormcaller. Her fingers closed around it. She wasn't surprised. She had known since the moment she'd pulled the trigger in that canyon. This was never just about Echo Team. "You're not being punished," the man said quietly. "You're being reassigned. We don't want pilots who follow orders. We want the ones who know when to ignore them." That night, floodlights lit the hangar where crews swarmed over Fury 3's broken frame. The jet had survived the graveyard twice, and now it was being patched together for something bigger. Soldiers paused as she walked past. No one saluted. No one spoke. They just watched. The general never mentioned the graveyard again. Official records marked the mission as compromised. But the men who had lived told a different story. They spoke of the roar of a warthog when the world had already written them off. They spoke of the ace who ignored the order. They spoke of Stormcaller.